Hello, my name is Alan, and today we are back with more. A Testament of Hope by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We are going to finish up the face-to-face television interview. So let's get into this. Evans. Mr. Wilkins, have you something to add? Wilkins. I think the reason one of the reasons that's not frequently cited, and perhaps I'll get in trouble by citing this, because it goes to a very touchy subject that arose last year. In the South, we still have a great deal of Negro family stability and control, and community control of families, and the imposition of standards of conduct in the North. With its great anonymous cities, Negro families come there. Sometimes they're disintegrated. Not even where they're not. They are lost in a huge population. The minister doesn't keep tabs on them like the minister did in the small town back home. They didn't know the police chief, and they didn't care. And they don't know the judge, and they don't know the things and the controls that operated in their home community. And when they come to Harlem, they're just John Smith, and they can do as they please. They don't have to pay any attention to mom and pop and the minister and the neighborhood, or anybody who knows about them and helps to control them, so they can run wild. Some of them. Others busy themselves going to night school and doing all the things that other people do. I think this is one of the reasons we haven't had as much whatever trouble we've had in the South, has been in the struggle to get the rights. In the North, it's been the struggle to make the North give us what they say we're supposed to have, you see. General applause. Evans. Dick Gregory, would you like to add a comment? But Dick, before you understand this language better than the rest of them. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to turn to the audience. We're not going on the air right now, but may I urge you to be orderly as you come forward, and we will designate either side to ask questions. Moreover, Mr. Gregory has one final comment on the previous question. Again, if you have compliments you want to pay by way of applause, don't hesitate and don't be afraid to make your questions as abrasive as you want, because I think that's the way we make for more enlightenment. Alright, we're ready. Name the state from which you come, and again, we urge you, no speeches, just questions, and short questions. And if you'll listen carefully to the previous question, we won't have any repetitions. Thank you. If face-to-face, the program to which you are now listening and viewing has one purpose, it is to stimulate your thought, to excite your curiosity. This distinguished panel meeting here before the International Platform Association at the Sheridan Park in Washington are about now to ask questions of our panel. However, in courtesy to Mr. Gregory, we had a final comment on the last question. Gregory. Yes, I think the question will be the most important question, and the commission will deal with. With all of the Southern white man's viciousness, he was always honest with the Negro, which has affected me physically in the knowledge he was never honest with me, which affected me mentally. And a man that has been affected mentally will tear up a town. That is the answer. Evans. Fine. Thanks very much. Now, to our audience. We turn to the gentleman on my left. Please, your name and the state from which you come, sir. Allen. I'm Henry G. Allen from the state of Mississippi, by way of Louisiana, and I hope I'm potato patch kin to the mayor up there. He sounded good. My question is to Mr. Wilkins. He's been an honest man through Louisiana and got LSU integrated. And he came to Jackson last year and they wouldn't let him march because he rode in a car. That's what Jackson Davis said. And he said we were here before the parade and we'll be here after. Evans. We remind you, no speeches, sir, just a question. Allen. Yes, the question is, have you got back to Mississippi yet? You were doing a good job. Wilkins. Yes, sir. I've been back to Mississippi and I'm going back there very shortly. Evans. Thank you very much. Now to the right, the lady. Aulick. Joan Aulick from New York State. And my question is directed to Mr. Wilkins. Earlier you said the Negro children require special teachers. What kind of teachers do you think can effectively teach them, maintain order in the classroom, and where do you get those teachers? Evans. Are you a teacher? Aulick. I have done some teaching, yes. Evans. I suspected as much. Thank you. Wilkins. In Harlem we have a school which is rather an exhibit school. It wasn't designed that way. These teachers have a simple requirement, and that is to believe that the children they are teaching are educable. We find throughout the United States, and this is not confined to Harlem, that so many teachers do not believe their Negro students can learn. So they give up trying to teach them. They also ought to learn that they can't teach them out of time and the Saturday Review of Literature, which they never heard of and which they can't subscribe to in their homes. They have to explore ways of reaching them, arousing their interests. And I'm not a teacher and I'm not an educator or professional. We need to explore new methods with a revolutionary attitude. Get rid of all the old cobwebs. Evans. Thank you very much. The gentleman on my left. Applause. Manus. My name is Arthur Tate Manus, and I am the senior minister of the First Community Church in Columbus, Ohio. My question is to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We are churchmen and concerned with the institution especially, and so I ask the question, what are the few important steps that the church should be taking now to prevent racial conflict? King. Well, I think there are two or three things that the church should be doing. First, we must recognize all over that this issue that we are dealing with is basically a moral issue. It's a question of the dignity of man, and the church, being the chief moral guardian of the community, should be in the forefront, taking a stand. Number one, the church should make it crystal clear that segregation and discrimination are morally wrong. Secondly, the church, through the channels of religious education, can do a great deal to remove the fears and the half-truths that are disseminated concerning Negroes. The fact is that a lot of people are prejudiced because of these basic fears and because they heard so many half-truths and outright lies concerning Negroes. And I think the church has failed to do a job through its channels of religious education in getting rid or seeking to get rid of these fears that people have about housing and all of the other things. The third thing is that the church must support meaningful legislation. Just as we got a number of churchmen to support the Civil Rights Bill in '64, we must continue to do that. There's a Civil Rights Bill before Congress right now, and we're all afraid that it won't get through. Churchmen ought to be here in Washington, lobbying creatively for that kind of thing. And the tragedy is that the church is too often been a tail light rather than a headlight, and it's time for the church to be a headlight on all these problems that we face. Evans. Thank you very much. The gentleman on my right. Applause. You, sir, are who? McCrae. I'm Vince McCrae from Mesa, Arizona. I have one son back from Vietnam and another son in the Army. And we have more sons to send over, and I want to ask Dr. King. He says that Negroes in Vietnam who are fighting and who are being killed are double that of the white man. I want to ask him if that is that not true, because the Negro re-enlists. Neither one of my boys would care to re-enlist, but I understand that the Negroes do. And I believe that's because they like it better there than they do at home. Evans. Thank you, Dr. King. King. Well, let me answer that by saying I don't think Negro soldiers like it being in Vietnam better than they like being at home, if home is all right. Now, I would say that you are right in saying that we have re-enlistments, and this probably doubles the number, but the fact is that Negroes are in combat in disproportionate numbers because they don't have the adequate education so often. In many instances, they re-enlist because of a lack of economic opportunities at home, because of the life they have to live as a result of not having a job or a nice home. So Negroes do end up going in the Army so often to get away from the terrible conditions that they face at home. Evans. Alright. King. And it seems to me that this is the tragedy of it, and it's a and it seems to me that this is the tragedy of it, and it's a great tragedy that Negroes have to go in the army because they face these terrible conditions at home. And this is why I take a stand against the conditions at home and against the war situation which they are forced to get is as a result of that. Evans. Do we have some other questions for Mayor Allen or Dick Gregory so we can spread it out? Would you like to step up a little closer then? Young lady, you go first. Voice. In addressing my question to Dr. King, I'd like to ask him why he is spending more time today speaking out against the war in Vietnam than raising funds for job training and scholarships for Negroes, which they so desperately need. Applause. King. Well, I think you have one or two misconceptions. I don't spend that much of my time on the peace question or on Vietnam because 95% of my time is still spent in the civil rights struggle. So that on the time question, you have a misconception there. On the other hand, I'm a clergyman. I was a clergyman before I was a civil rights leader. And I was ordained to the Christian ministry. I accepted that as a commission to constantly and forever bring the ethical insights of our Judeo-Christian heritage to bear on the social evils of our day. And I happen to think war is one of the major evils facing mankind. Secondly, applause. Secondly, it would be foolhardy for me to work for integrated schools or integrated lunch counters and not be concerned about the survival of the world in which to be integrated. Third, I have worked too long. Applause. Third, I have worked too long now and too hard to get rid of segregation in public accommodations to turn back to the point of segregating my moral concern. Justice is indivisible. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And wherever I see injustice, I'm going to take a stand against it, whether it's in Mississippi or whether it's in Vietnam. Evans. Thank you very much. Applause. We have other distinguished people we would like to ask questions, and there's another party from whom we'd like to hear, and he also has priority. We continue now as the ladies and gentlemen of the International Platform Association gathered here in convention at the Sheridan Park Hotel in Washington are meeting face-to-face men who have answers and they have questions. Polk. My name is Roy E. Polk Jr. from Nashville, Tennessee. I would like to ask a question of Dr. King, who has proposed to guarantee annual wage. I would like to know what yardstick Dr. King would propose for this guaranteed wage, and to ask if that will not tend to deprive the recipients of the human dignity that he seeks to give them. Evans. Thank you very much, Dr. King. Applause. King, let me say this, that I'm not calling for a guaranteed annual wage as a substitute for a guaranteed job. I think that ought to be the first thing, that we guarantee every person capable of working a job. And this can be done in many, many ways. There are many things that we need to be done, that could be done, that's not being done now. And this could provide the jobs. I'm speaking of a guaranteed annual wage as a minimum income for every American family, so that there is an economic floor and nobody falls beneath that. And of course, there are definitely going to be people all along, people who are unemployable as a result of age, as a result of lack of something that failed to develop here or there, and as a result of physical disability. Now these are the people who just couldn't work. Certainly they have a right to have an income. If one has a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then he has a right to have an income. Now, this may mean a radical, in a sense, redefinition of work. Maybe we've got to come to see that a mother who's at home as a housekeeper or as a housewife is working. Maybe we've got to see now that the fellow who drops out of school and later needs to go back to school is working when he's studying and he couldn't get back to school. Maybe. If he didn't get some money. So maybe we need to redefine work. Evans, I think his question, Dr. King, was, will this rob him of his dignity, which you made reference to earlier? King, yes, all right. That's the thing. I think it will give him more dignity, and I think the question you're asking is whether I'm advocating that you just give people money and not seek to have a situation develop where everybody can work if they're capable of working. I feel first that we ought to talk about guaranteed jobs. Then guaranteed annual income would be the minimum wage, which ought to be beyond the poverty level that everybody would get in this country. Evans, thank you very much. The lady here now, a very lovely lady in the front row. Pankos. I'm Wilma Pankos from Maryland. My question is addressed to Mayor Allen. Do we have the administrative structure, the business planning and structure to enable us to undertake and to carry out the massive home building program which you propose in from 3 to 5 years? Have we got the economic know-how and the speed to do it, and to use the untrained, unskilled workers which it's been proposed should be hired for that purpose? Allen, obviously, an economy that can supply a war effort like we did in World War II and has the vigor of the American economy today certainly has the capabilities in a 3 or 5 year period of time to build the necessary number of low-income housing units in this country that would eliminate the slums. The problem of using the unskilled worker out of the slums is a more difficult one. But I personally feel that with a minimum of job training, this could be accomplished, and they could be taken off the unemployment rolls and put into gainful employment. Yes, ma'am, we do have the capabilities, and at the present time, we have the timing to do it. It's merely a matter of the appropriation of dollars. Evans. Thank you, Mayor. Now the gentleman to my right. Shriver. I am Dr. Ed Shriver from Alexandria, Virginia. I have a question about revolution. We know the old forms of revolution of violence. That's the oldest one. The mayor of Atlanta has described a modified revolutionary form of unprecedented massive effort on housing. I'm curious about anyone on the panel saying that what are the new forms of revolution. Evans. All right, Dick, you handle that. Gregory. I think revolution follows the form of evolution, which is a naturalistic, gradualistic change that after long periods of time leads into revolution, which is quick change when a pregnant woman goes through 9 months gestation period. That's evolution. And when the water bag breaks, that's revolution. And all the soldiers on the face of this earth couldn't cross one woman's legs after the water bag breaks and keep the baby in, and I think we have moved this country's personal shame from evolution to revolution. And this again is why I say this commission is so important. And our faith and destiny depends on these gentlemen. Evans. Any other comments from the panel? All right, the lady on my left. Bailey. I am Mrs. George R. Bailey, Jr. from Roxbury, Massachusetts, president of the Roxbury-Dorchester Community Beautification Program. I would like to direct my question to Mayor Allen. What can be done about massive type programs? We are now working on this type program from a local level on community beautification program. A program that is working. Evans. We'd like you not to make a speech, just a question. Bailey. People on a local level, we have to have a medium to meet all people. Gardening is one of the answers. What can we do to bring this to our nation? Allen. Well, obviously there are major programs being advocated with federal help from urban beautification, and I think if our local officials will cooperate with the federal programs, that they can develop a program and apply for the necessary funds that will certainly help beautify the town in which you live. Evans. Thank you very much. The gentleman on my right now. Zed. My name is D.E.Z. from Baltimore, Maryland. All the talk so far about urban renewal will take 3 to 5 years. Is there any way way of a stopgap measure where a fast modeling job can be done. For instance, they tried in New York. They built an apartment, a completely new apartment, in 4 days. The United States Gypsum Corporation did that. Can anything be done now where it can be worked faster until real urban renewal can take over? Evans, are you directing that to any specific panelist? Zed, to Mr. Wilkins. Wilkins, I think we can do certain things that we've done in New York that with prefabricated and arranged furniture and a concentrated crew to get it all in 10 or 12 hours. But of course, this depends, and on a great scale, on the cooperation of many, many areas, and you'd have to get the cooperation of the building trades and the politicians and the budget makers and the people who live there and all that sort of thing. I think it's the kind of thinking we need if we're going to do something and not wait 5 years for it. Evans. All right, one more question here. Poland. Blanken in Poland of West Virginia. I think that Mr. Wilkins touched on this question, but I'd like to ask Reverend King. In relation to the irrationality, or the question of irrationality of why Detroit, is it possible that the important point of social suicide is being neglected? It is known that when individuals are freed of destructive influences that they will suicide. Is Detroit an example of social community suicide because destructive forces have been relieved? Evans. We have time for a short answer, Dr. Wilkins. Or Dr. King, if you can. King. Well, I think there is no doubt about it from a psychological point of view that there can be a suicidal tendency in all riots. When one commits suicide, often he's trying to get attention or to communicate a message that has not been communicated. And I do see in some of the riots a kind of saying, I would be rather dead than ignored. And this final mad quest for attention, trying to find voice for the voiceless. So that from that point of view, I think there may be a suicidal quality, but it's a purely psychological explanation. Evans, thank you very much. We have a few more questions. I think we stopped on this gentleman on my left. You, sir, your name and from where you come. Bessamara. My name is Auriel Bessamara. I'm from Columbia, South Carolina, and I would like to ask Mayor Allen of Atlanta if he doesn't think that in making a massive attack on this problem that the nation faces, we must also make a massive attack on education. Evans. All right, is that your question? Allen. Well, I heartily agree with you. We have a threefold problem in simple terms, and that's housing, jobs, and education. But what I say is, if you correct the housing problem, at the same time, that gives you the capabilities of better educating people. I don't think that you give quality education while people are living in slums. Evans. All right, thank you. We have so many questions, my friend, that we'll have to ask somebody. Boyce, I wanted to ask if we do not need to make a massive attack on the problem of educating the people how to live in these new apartments and housing units. This is the most important because, applause, Boyce, I have seen units put up and turned into slums. These very brand new units are put up and the people moved in, and 4 months later they have turned them into slums because their consciousness has not been raised to the right level. Applause. Evans, thank you. Are you eager to answer that question? Alan, well, I'm delighted to come in on it. I heartily agree with you. Evans, I think I'd rather have the answer from one of the other fellows. Voice, I have not had my question answered. Evans, all right. Gregory, I think that when you stop and look at the housing projects, I think that's the education. They build these skyscrapers for poor people, and then they don't put doorbells in them. Dogs bark. People ring. You have 80% of the people living in the projects are little kids. They got 19 floors to go. They got a play yard downstairs. Then they have to go to the washroom, and they have to go 18 floors. You would tear up a building, too, if you had to live under the same condition that they build. They build the buildings for poor people, and that's why they get so torn up. Booze. Evans. Mr. Wilkins. Obviously, we have a lot of landlords here. General laughter. I went to visit a friend of mine who lives in a brand new apartment house in the Riverdale section of the Bronx. And the rental is about $500 a month. And when my wife and I got to the elevator, we saw words scrawled on the walls. And I said, I don't know Harlem lived up here. And I spoke to my friends and they said, oh, the kids in the building are most like the kids in Harlem. They ride over everything, even in the $500 a month apartment. But of course, we always hear about Negroes creating slums, but we don't hear about what white people do to slums. Applause. Evans. Obviously, time is our worst enemy, and time has run out. Face to Face has attempted to explore and explain the terrifying phenomenon of summer 1967. We're grateful to the International Platform Association. Very grateful to you, Drew Pearson, for making this program possible. And we most sincerely thank our distinguished guests for their effective participation. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Mayor Ivan Allen of Atlanta, Georgia, Mr. Roy Wilkins of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and Mr. Dick Gregory, citizen. This is Mark Evans. Thank you for joining us on Face to Face. Applause. So, yeah. And that was the end of the interview. So yeah, um, you can see even then that how certain African American people were being viewed by whites. And then, of course, it caused many of them to be somewhat hostile in their attitudes. Um, but yeah. And I find it interesting there, Dr. King's like, people should have some kind of income. Even if they're not working, if they've got other issues going on. So he was a little bit ahead of Andrew Yang there. Again, he proposed guaranteed jobs first, and then those who, for whatever reason, are unable to work, to get a form of guaranteed income. Like we've talked about before, Dr. King did have his socialist tendencies. They're not often spoke about a lot because, of course, we live in a very capitalism-centric nation, but yeah. They only want to talk about, oh, he was a great leader that, you know, made civil rights possible and all this. But he had his own socialistic ideas that he felt was necessary to help the justice of people. But yeah, as always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, later.